The silence. John Galsworthy. In a car of the Naples Express, a mining expert was diving into a bag for papers. The strong sunlight showed the fine wrinkles on his brown face, and the shabbiness of his short, rough beard. A newspaper cutting slipped from his fingers. He picked it up, thinking, how the dickens did that get in here? It was from a colonial print of 3 years back, and he sat staring, as if in that forlorn slip of yellow paper he had encountered some ghost from his past. These were the words he read: "We hope that the setback to civilization, the check to commerce and development, in this promising center of our colony may be but temporary, and that capital may again come to the rescue. Where one man was successful, others should surely not fail. We are convinced that it only needs." And the last words: "For what can be sadder than to see the forest spreading its lengthening shadows, like symbols of defeat, over the untenanted dwellings of men, and where was once the merry chatter of human voices, to pass by in the silence." On an afternoon, 13 years before, he had been in the city of London, at one of those emporiums where mining experts perch, before fresh flights, like seagulls on some favorite rock. A clerk said to him, "Mr. Scorrier, they are asking for you downstairs. Mr. Hemmings of the New Colliery Company." Scorrier took up the speaking tube. "Is that you, Mr. Scorrier? I hope you are very well, sir. I am Hemmings. I am coming up." In 2 minutes he appeared, Christopher Hemmings, secretary of the New Colliery Company, known in the city behind his back as Down by the Starn Hemmings. He grasped Scorrier's hand. The gesture was deferential, yet distinguished. Too handsome, too capable, too important. His figure, the cut of his iron-gray beard, and his intrusively fine eyes, conveyed a continual courteous invitation to inspect their infallibilities. He stood, like a city atlas, with his legs apart, his coat-tails gathered in his hands, a whole globe of financial matters deftly balanced on his nose. "Look at me," he seemed to say. "It's heavy, but how easily I carry it. Not the man to let it down, sir." "I hope I see you well, Mr. Scorrier," he began. "I have come round about our mine. There is a question of a fresh field being opened up between ourselves, not before it's wanted. I find it difficult to get my board to take a comprehensive view. In short, the question is, are you prepared to go out for us, and report on it? The fees will be all right." His left eye closed. "Things have been very erratic. We are going to change our superintendent. I have got little Pippin. You know little Pippin?" Scorrier murmured, with a feeling of vague resentment, "Oh yes. He's not a mining man." Hemmings replied, "We think that he will do." "Do you?" thought Scorrier. "That's good of you." He had not altogether shaken off a worship he had felt for Pippin King. Pippin he was always called, when they had been boys at the Camborne Grammar School. King Pippin. The boy with the bright color, very bright hair, bright, subtle, elusive eyes, broad shoulders, little stoop in the neck, and a way of moving it quickly like a bird, the boy who was always at the top of everything, and held his head as if looking for something further to be the top of. He remembered how one day King Pippin had said to him in his soft way, "Young Scorry, I'll do your sums for you," and in answer to his dubious, "Is that all right?" had replied, "Of course I don't want you to get behind that beast Blake, he's not a Cornishman." The beast Blake was an Irishman not yet 12. He remembered, too, an occasion when King Pippin with 2 other boys fought 6 louts and got a licking, and how Pippin sat for half an hour afterwards, all bloody, his head in his hands, rocking to and fro, and weeping tears of mortification, and how the next day he had sneaked off by himself, and, attacking the same gang, got frightfully mauled a second time. Thinking of these things he answered curtly, "When shall I start?" "Down by the Starn," Hemmings replied with a sort of fearful sprightliness, "there's a good fellow. I will send instructions, so glad to see you well." Conferring on Scorrier a look fine to the verge of vulgarity, he withdrew. Scorrier remained, seated, heavy with insignificance and vague oppression, as if he had drunk a tumbler of sweet port. A week later, in company with Pippin, he was on board a liner. The King Pippin of his school days was now a man of 44. He awakened in Scorrier the uncertain wonder with which men look backward at their uncomplicated teens, and staggering up and down the decks in the long Atlantic roll, he would steal glances at his companion, as if he expected to find out from them something about himself. Pippin had still King Pippin's bright, fine hair, and dazzling streaks in his short beard. He had still a bright color and suave voice, and what there were of wrinkles suggested only subtleties of humor and ironic sympathy. From the first, and apparently without negotiation, he had his seat at the captain's table, to which on the second day Scorrier too found himself translated, and had to sit, as he expressed it ruefully, among the bigwigs. During the voyage only one incident impressed itself on Scorrier's memory, and that for a disconcerting reason. In the forecastle were the usual complement of emigrants. One evening, leaning across the rail to watch them, he felt a touch on his arm, and, looking round, saw Pippin's face and beard quivering in the lamplight. "Poor people," he said. "The Idea flashed on Scorrier that he was like some fine wire sound recording instrument. Suppose he were to snap, he thought. Impelled to justify this fancy, he blurted out, "You're a nervous chap. The way you look at those poor devils." Pippin hustled him along the deck. "Come, come, you took me off my guard," he murmured, with a sly, gentle smile. "That's not fair." He found it a continual source of wonder that Pippin, at his age, should cut himself adrift from the associations and security of London life to begin a new career in a new country with dubious prospect of success. "I always heard he was doing well all round," he thought. "Thinks he'll better himself, perhaps. He's a true Cornishman." The morning of arrival at the mines was grey and cheerless, a cloud of smoke, beaten down by drizzle, clung above the forest. The wooden houses straggled dismally in the unkempt semblance of a street, against a background of endless, silent woods. An air of blank discouragement brooded over everything. Cranes jutted idly over empty trucks, the long jetty oozed black slime. Miners with listless faces stood in the rain. Dogs fought under their very legs. On the way to the hotel they met no one busy or serene except a Chinese who was polishing a dish cover. The late superintendent, a cowed man, regaled them at lunch with his forebodings. His attitude toward the situation was like the food, which was greasy and uninspiring. Alone together once more, the two newcomers eyed each other sadly. "Oh dear," sighed Pippin. "We must change all this, Scorrier. It will never do to go back beaten." "I shall not go back beaten. You will have to carry me on my shield," and slyly, "Too heavy, poor fellow." Then for a long time he was silent, moving his lips as if adding up the cost. Suddenly he sighed, and grasping Scorrier's arm, said, "Dull, aren't I? What will you do? Put me in your report?" New superintendent sad, "Dull dog, not a word to throw at a cat." And as if the new task were too much for him, he sank back in thought. The last words he said to Scorrier that night were, "Very silent here. It's hard to believe one's here for life. But I feel I am. Mustn't be a coward, though." And brushing his forehead, as though to clear from it a cobweb of faint thoughts, he hurried off. Scorrier stayed on the veranda smoking. The rain had ceased. A few stars were burning dimly. Even above the squalor of the township the scent of the forests, the interminable forests, brooded. There sprang into his mind the memory of a picture from one of his children's fairy books, the picture of a little bearded man on tiptoe, with poised head and a great sword, slashing at the castle of a giant. It reminded him of Pippin. And suddenly, even to Scorrier, whose existence was one long encounter with strange places, the unseen presence of those woods, their heavy, healthy scent, the little sounds, like squeaks from tiny toys, issuing out of the gloomy silence, seemed intolerable, to be shunned, from the mere instinct of self-preservation. He thought of the evening he had spent in the bosom of down by the Starn Hemmings family, receiving his last instructions. The security of that suburban villa, its discouraging gentility, the superior acidity of the Miss Hemmings, the noble names of large contractors, of company promoters, of a peer, dragged with the lightness of gun carriages across the conversation, the autocracy of Hemmings, rasped up here and there, by some domestic contradiction. It was all so nice and safe, as if the whole thing had been fastened to an anchor sunk beneath the pink cabbages of the drawing-room carpet. Hemmings, seeing him off the premises, had said with secrecy, "Little Pippin will have a good thing. We shall make his salary L. He'll be a great man, quite a king. Ha ha." Scorrier shook the ashes from his pipe. Salary, he thought, straining his ears, I wouldn't take the place for £5,000 a year. And yet, it's a fine country, and with ironic violence he repeated, a dashed fine country. 10 days later, having finished his report on the new mine, he stood on the jetty waiting to go aboard the steamer for home. "God bless you," said Pippin. "Tell them they needn't be afraid."
Thanks for being a part of Chronicles Corner. I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for future updates. Goodbye.